Hello everyone. In this video I'm going to introduce you to Adobe 3D Substance Stager. This software is used to create 3D scenes, and in the design world we see it often used for packaging and even sometimes as an illustration tool. So jumping right in, I'll show you how you navigate this 3D space here. You can see that the screen is divided into a couple of different panels, which might start to feel familiar to you as you continue to learn more about the Adobe programs. At the top, you can see that there are design and render tabs. We work in the design tab, and I'll explain the render tab a little bit later. The center is called the viewport, or the scene, where you place your objects. I put a couple of planes in here for now to simulate a ground and some walls. And I can show you how I did that a little bit later. When you're navigating this space, there are three main forms of movement. There's panning, there's orbiting, and there is dollying. And the shortcuts for those are just 1, 2, and 3. And you can also access those tools over here on the left-hand side. When you want to select your object directly, you can use this arrow, the selection arrow, where the shortcut is V. And if you hit F, it'll zoom in and frame your selection. Now I'm going to show you how to place objects and move objects around in your scene. When you place an object, it's given a three-way coordinate, an X and Y and Z on this plane. And this 3D world here is called the scene. And in the upper right-hand panel, it shows you the objects in the scene. You can select your objects through here and also via the selection tool. When you select an object, you see this pink, green, and blue object show up over it, which is called the gizmo. You click the center of the gizmo to move your object around and snap it to surfaces. You use the arrows on the gizmo to move the object. You use the circles to rotate the object. And you use the squares to move the object. When you move the object, it will always move parallel to the ground plane. And snapping is automatically enabled, but you can turn it off with a shortcut X. So now let's talk about these 3D assets and how you can add them to your scene. There is a very wide selection of assets built into the left-hand side of this program. And these icons at the top filter your assets. You have models, materials, lights, and images. When you double-click an object, it defaults to the center of the scene. This is kind of big. Let's scale this down a bit. You can also drag and drop an object onto the scene. Now let's talk about how you apply materials to objects. Right now, everything is just this muted default, gray, just while you're setting up your scene. But when you apply materials, it affects the color, the texture, and more of your object. So over here, there is a large library of materials. When you place your object, it is given a default material. But let's say that I want my floor of the plane to have some sort of concrete look and feel. So what you can do is you can just drag and drop your material right on to the object. So now you can see that it's got this fake concrete look and feel. And it might be looking a little wonky, but that's because this is sort of a fast display so that you can continue to work very easily and quickly. If you want to get a preview of what your scene will look like when you export it, you could turn on ray tracing. But you shouldn't work in ray tracing. That's more so just for to give you an idea of what your scene will look like when you export it. So if you give me a moment, I'm just going to apply some materials to the scene and jump back into the tutorial in 1 second. Okay, now that I have my scene set a little bit, I'll explain a little bit more about applying and manipulating materials. To isolate specific areas, you can use the magic wand tool or shortcut A. If you want certain parts of your object to be manipulated differently than the entirety of your object, and you just hold down shift, and let's say I want this to have this purple texture. When you double click the object, you can scale, rotate, and position your materials and affect them and customize them however you want. So maybe I want to turn down this color variation a little bit to make it look like maybe it's filled with soap or something like that, because it is a fake soap bottle after all. In the upper right hand corner, this panel will show you what you've applied to the object. You can further manipulate and customize the object and material properties through the properties panel down here. Now let's talk about adding custom graphics, which is what we will be doing in class today. This is super relevant to all of you because this is how you'll drop artwork onto objects, your custom artwork that you make. So in order to do this, you double click your object, you go to the properties panel, you go to the materials tab, and you click the material. When you click the file icon, this is how you add your graphic. By default mode, your graphic is laid as a decal. This makes sense if you're adding, a label to the packaging. You could change it to fill mode via the drop down if it's more of a pattern. So for the other material, it makes sense to place that as fill mode. You might have noticed that I'm dropping live Illustrator files onto the objects. Something that is cool about this program is it links directly to Photoshop and Illustrator. So you can create multiple artboards in Illustrator and test them in real time by clicking this small icon next to the image. And you can select different artboards. Now this file just has one artboard, but that is something cool where you can test your different patterns in real time. Another way to apply artwork to an object is you can simply drag and drop it from your Finder. Now, when you're dropping your graphics onto these objects, you're dropping them onto its UV. UVs are the 2D representation of the 3D model that wraps the model's surface. So think about how you print a box template and design it in 2D before you erect it in 3D. So something that is cool and useful in this program is you can directly export these UVs as two-dimensional templates, work on them right in Illustrator, and have them map the 3D surface perfectly. So the way that you do that is you go to File, Export, Selected Object UV. Next, let's talk about adding lighting to your scene to simulate real-world lighting. The main forms of lighting are physical and environment. The environment lights are like a dome that wrap around your entire scene. You can double click to add environment lights, or you can simply drag and drop. Down here in your properties panel, you can affect the rotation of the light, the intensity of the light, even the size and color. Next, you can fine-tune your setup with physical lights, which are individual sources of illumination. Point lights emit light in every direction, area lights emit light from a plane, and spotlights give a cone of light, which you can change the width of that cone in the parameters. So real quick, I'll add a spotlight. So right above my shampoo bottle, I just added a spotlight. And something that's kind of cool is you can change the color of the light that emits from the dome. So let's add a little blue mood lighting. And maybe we can turn up the intensity a little bit for fun. Lastly, this directional light is a little different from all the other lights. It emits powerful rays of light from far away, like the sun. So rotating it matters, but not positioning. And, just like other materials and objects, you can change the color, exposure, intensity. It's pretty cool. Lastly, let's talk about setting up cameras. Cameras are like bookmarks for what you want to export, and you can save different points of view and multiple points of view. And let me show you how. So let's say we got our scene looking exactly how we want it to look, and this is the viewpoint that I want to render. You go up here and you click Add Camera. I think that looks pretty great, but maybe I also want an angle that's a little bit more like this. So you can add another camera. Now let's say that you want to make additional edits. Make sure in this drop down up top you are in your viewport camera. That way any changes that you make will be reflected in your bookmarked points of view. The viewport camera is for placing objects and setting the scene, and you use the set cameras to render what we see. Now that we have the scene looking exactly how we like it, and we have a couple of our bookmarked camera viewpoints, we can jump up now into the Render tab. In the Export panel up here, you can see all the views that you can render out. Now, don't be discouraged if it takes a minute for Stager to show you a preview of your render image. Here you can name your file if you haven't already. You can choose where you save it on your computer. And you can change the format to either an editable PSD or just a flat PNG file. By default, the scene renders in 1920 by 1080, which is pretty standard, but you can change this in the properties if you want to. And there you have it. Your render is finished and saved, and I hope that you enjoyed learning about Adobe Substance Stager.